All right, let's see what this white man thinks about who are Bolsheviks really, everything you need to know, which I wish we had Bolsheviks because then the Bolsheviks would be supported by Dems if you know the history. Dems kill communists. So we're going to see exactly what he means by Bolshevik, which pretty much means someone who wants a homeless person to have a house or a place to sleep.
Our main project is to unite the working class in this country against a fascist agenda.
We will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism.
If you are starting off looking at the threat, saying, okay, where do the remnants of Bolshevism still exist? And you've predetermined Jew, you've just ignored atheists, Muslims, secular Jews like Bernie. The Bolshevik Revolution. Let me ask you this. How familiar are you with the Bolsheviks, revolutionary Russia, which of course paved the way? You had Lenin, paved the way for Stalin. I have consistently discussed and maintained that it's very bizarre that this is not discussed at large, that we learn about World War II and Hitler, bad, to be clear, Hitler was bad, but we very rarely learn in school. I never learned in school about Mao.
I learned almost nothing about Russian involvement.
Yeah, Mao, Stalin, none of it. Why? Well, now some people are asking those same questions, only they're providing you with answers that are verifiably wrong. But for the record, this is something we've discussed here for a very long time. Stalin, a lot of people, we asked, they were not familiar with Stalin at all. And of course, that's interesting because Stalin, Hitler, same period of time. Stalin certainly killed more people. But if you spend all of this time learning about Adolf Hitler in school, you would think that you would learn just as much about Stalin. We kind of skimmed over Stalin. So they always compare to Hitler. But not only is barely any attention given to these other horrible dictators who, by the way, cost many more lives. We'll get to that. Communism, socialism, they have to be careful. We hear a lot about Adolf Hitler. And we don't hear a lot about other people who I would argue are not only just as bad, but historically equally, if not more significant. People like Stalin, people like Mao. Pol Pot, I think, is the worst. As a matter of fact, we did a series, The Great Dictator, Dictators Throughout History. The purpose of that was to highlight that every single one of them, with the exception of maybe Pinochet, and the left would argue Hitler, far, far left. I think the winner was Mao. It might have been Pol Pot because Pol Pot was a greater percentage. So we've been covering this for a long time. You can go back and look at old videos that cover the A to Z on Karl Marx. I believe we either did Trotsky or Lenin. But today I want to specifically address the Bolshevik Revolution because some people have just recently discovered it. Now, first, let me concede. It is true. In the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a disproportionate percentage of Jews in positions of leadership early on. Okay? I'll get into the context as to why that is the case, but anyone who uses the term Bolshevik, Jew interchangeably is uneducated or lying to you. And here's why that matters. Please, just listen to this, hear me out, go check the references. There are still Bolsheviks today. They still want the same things. And if you misidentify the drivers, the motivators, or the threats, well, then you'll let the wolves in the door, like Islam, or link arms with the modern Democrat Party, who, by the way, is an extension of Bolshevism. Still a statue of Lenin, right now, 16 feet high in the United States. We'll get to that. Where do you think it is? Who do you think supports it? This brings us to, right now, people new to this, internet intellectuals, however you want to refer to them, Bolshevism is synonymous with Jewishness.
In Russia, like millions and millions of Christians were being exterminated by the Bolshevik Jews up there.
And the funny thing is, the Bolsheviks were everything that they told you the Nazis were. And they had proven it. They had already made
mostly true.
Christianity illegal. They had made religion illegal. They'd also made it, by the way, illegal to criticize.
Well, people think that the greatest mass murderer was Adolf Hitler. And no, actually, if you want to talk about genocide, the fact that people in America don't know about what the Bolsheviks did to Christians, where did the idea of a concentration camp come from? The Bolsheviks.
And by the way, that is true. That is true that they did persecute, kill Christians, because Bolsheviks, and especially if you look at the leadership of Lenin, was distinctly anti-Christian. Now,
The concept of being anti-religion is because of the enactment of exploitative means where religion was used to keep people in their subhuman positions of very lesser state, barely having money, barely having resources, and telling you to be happy because you're supposed to die for God. And then when you die for God, you'll die pathetic and poor, and they'll tell you that the poorest people can make it into heaven easier than the richest, so you'll feel proud about being poor and then killed off. So it's just really accelerating their belief system, since it's the same concept of a bunch of people who believe in magic God or magic being, and then having that magic being guide them. It's a very idiotic group of people that will radicalize themselves to kill any leadership that is already trying to enact science because they think science is evil and the devil. So essentially, a lot of them are going to have to re-educate them. And oftentimes when you try to re-educate people, a lot of them are going to rebel and try and kill you, which is why a lot of them end up getting arrested for terrorism or espionage. And sometimes it just becomes a hate-filled agenda where two cultures clash, where you have one ideology that is just filled with a bunch of white supremacist Christian ideology, and then you have a bunch of scientific algorithms that fight forward with the idea of making sure that no religion can topple an empire, but really an empire was really one on socialism and communism, which is for all the people to be uplifted and be able to survive and have the resources in order to have a quality life. So it's oftentimes when you run into this idea of uplifting people, you find like here in America, a lot of Christians will use their God or religion as an excuse to keep people poor because they think it's stealing from them since they preach about prosperity. And that prosperity preaching is what tells them that God has given them a gift. And so if anyone comes to take your gift, you're against God, you're against the gifts a person is exploiting the poor for. Which is why you have slavery in America, you have discrimination against black and brown people. You even have Mormons who discriminate against black and brown people because they see them as a lesser being because they're not equal to the white person. Which is why the ideology that they have is oftentimes to excuse their evil deeds and evil ideology of exploitation, which turns to capitalism, which is why the Mormons and the Christians and the Catholics all unite together to ask God to forgive them as they exploit the poor, and the poor can never succeed in a rebellion because the rebellion is just a sign of the devil inside of them. Because they use the religion to pervert extermination projects against the black and brown through segregated communities, and then use capitalism as the excuse to hide behind saying that's science of prosperity, which God has granted them. This is why there's a big fight between the people who don't believe in a God and only believe in science, and the people that believe in God and science through the excuse of using God as the reason why they have to do it and live that way. Because they'll say it's their cultural reason to exterminate and kill and exploit people because God loves them more than the rest of you.
I'm going to say they were all Jews. Well, I'll get to the numbers. It was about 5% of the Bolsheviks were Jews. They made up anywhere from 2 to 5% of the population. More of the leadership. But some of these places include people like Lenin as Jew. Well, he did have some Jewish ethnicity in his family. His parents, they converted to Christianity before he was born. He was distinctly atheist, and he wanted to destroy the idea of God. Peace without God was one of their slogans. Now, if you think that observant, practicing Jews are out there destroying religion because they espouse peace without God, fine, there's no convincing you. But I want to go through a couple of things. How the Bolsheviks came to be, who they were, and what they ultimately did, because it is important. We've talked about it quite a bit. This is remedial for those of you who have been here a while. Bolsheviks, radical Marxist faction, right, early 1900s in Russia, specifically formed in 1903. There was a split, the Russian Social Democrat Labor Party. You had the Mensheviks and you had the Bolsheviks, which, funny, Menshevik means minority, Bolshevik means majority, even though they ended up kind of, oscillating where sometimes one would be the majority, one would be the minority. And the Bolsheviks were led by Vladimir Lenin. This is one of those saying, well, Lenin read a book on Marx, just so you know how badly it's permeated culture, as though people aren't horrified by that American pie. Also, something interesting, the Mensheviks were effectively socialists as well. But they believed because Russia was so poor that they would go through the legal process and they would need a period of capitalism to generate some kind of wealth and then hand it over to the state.
They always do. They always need a little capitalism first. They say seize the means of production, seize the means of whatever. It's because it existed because of capitalism.
Well, that's where the Bolsheviks said, no, we don't need that anyway because the state won't exist. And through quite a bit of violence early on, then we'll do away with state violence. And of course, it just led to abject poverty, failures by any metric, and of course, mass death, which the Nazis would have would have been jealous over. So if you look at the Bolsheviks, Lenin, it was basically the difference, narrower party leadership than the Mensheviks. They believed in elite leadership. They didn't believe in democratic decision-making. They said a conversation will take place, but everyone gets in line and marches once they have orders. So it's almost a self-defeating argument at this point. But they believed in radical political revolution, and it was distinctly anti-God, distinctly anti-Christian because of the Russian Orthodox Church at that point. A party, I think, formalized, I believe it was 1912, conference in Prague. Okay. That's how it came to be. Who were the Bolsheviks? Well, it was mostly like people from intelligentsia, as you would know them, like academia now. By the way, you see a lot of Bolsheviks in academia to this day. That's where you see a lot of socialists, a lot of people who say communism in theory works. Factory workers, peasants, very similar to the alliance that we saw before the restructuring of right and left under Donald Trump. It was intelligentsia and then kind of big unions. This brings us to, were they all Jewish? Were they mostly Jewish? They started a higher percentage of Jews, around 10% in the early 1900s. And a big reason for that, just to be clear, is because Jews were specifically discriminated against under Tsarist Russia. Mm-hmm. So they were naturally going to be more inclined to take part in revolutionary politics. On average, about 5%, though, Bolsheviks were Jewish. And on average, Jews made up about 4% of the total Russian population.
So that's pretty representative.
Yeah. Ethnic Russian, about 78%. Also, you can look at other groups, too. People will say the Jews. They'll say they were disproportionately represented at the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution. Sure. Now do Latvians. Now do Georgians. Why? Because people who had an axe to grind would try and ride the coattails of any revolutionary measures at that point in time. Let's say during the American era of slavery, there was a party that specifically came about and said, you know what, we are going to free the slaves. Well, of course, that would be the party they support for a very long time. Yes, I just described the Republican Party. So that's why. The context does matter. Now, they did make up quite a bit of the leadership, Jewish people, of the Bolshevik leadership, about 28%. Ethnic Russians, 42%. The category would be somewhere around 30-something%. But here's the thing. The reason for that, too, is Jews made up a significant percentage of all of those involved in politics in that interrevolutionary period. Why? High literacy rates. Big part of that is they were limited in certain jobs that they could do. So a lot of their jobs involved literacy. A lot of their jobs involved intellectual endeavors. They were discriminated against, to be clear. And it doesn't justify anyone taking part in Bolshevism, to be clear. Hate it. I've been talking about it for decades. Jews made up about 10% of all political elite. Check the references. I make this all available to you. Ranging the whole political spectrum, by the way. So people say Jews made up a disproportionate amount of the Bolsheviks. Well, no. As far as total Bolsheviks, 4% of the population, about 5%. They made up a huge percent of the leadership. Again, those numbers are muddied because you have people who may be ethnically Jewish. The one thing of which you can be certain is there were no faithful practicing Jews who wanted to maintain their practices with synagogues and the right to worship who were Bolsheviks. They were secular. Very much in the same way that comparing Ben Shapiro to Harvey Weinstein wouldn't be fair. Or people celebrating Passover, their local synagogue, local temple, would not be comparable to those who are involved in the UN or the WEF who don't believe in God at all. Here's some actual proof of that. The 1918 constituent elections, there are about 417,000, 490-something thousand, depending on the numbers you use, votes for Jewish parties. They mostly went to Zionist parties, about 80,000 of which went to socialist parties. Bolsheviks were not even amongst the top 3 supported by Jews in Russia. So there were far, far more Jews in Russia who were opposed to Bolshevism than those who supported it. Yes, disproportionate percentage of those in leadership were Jewish. Here's a fun fact, too. The term Jewish Bolshevism, to try and confuse you and believe that the problem is Jews, not Bolsheviks, who are Marxists, communists. Lenin was effectively Karl Marx. He was Karl Marx in a position of leadership. Mm-hmm. It was popularized directly by those involved with the Nazi Party. Dietrich Eckart, founder of actual Nazism, Alfred Rosenberg, Nazi official. And then, of course, you had Henry Ford, who was writing letters to Hitler, like, hey, pen pal.
Great making cars, not so much on this issue.
Right. What did the Bolsheviks do? So this brings us to who they were, who they weren't. And really quickly, I've, again, said this for why don't they talk about Stalinist Russia, considering that far more people were killed? For the same reason they don't want to discuss Maoist China. They don't really want to discuss Pol Pot's Cambodia. Because the left doesn't want to direct you to the history of the left. Because they still exist. They're still trying to convince you that Bolshevism, Marxism could work today. So they don't want to point you to the hundreds of millions, historically, of deaths at the hands of the left. People simply now say, well, it's because Jews don't want you to. It's because the left doesn't want to direct you to the founders of their feast. Here's what the Bolsheviks did. 1917, that was the October Revolution. They seized power from the Russian Provisional Government. There was the Red Terror. You guys have heard of this. People who are new here, they just kind of throw that on you. 1918 to 1922, 200,000 people were executed by the Bolsheviks during this consolidation.
You can tell that a lot of this is kind of accurate because, again, the executions are now replaced with the cancel culture, which are now the lynch mobs, which are now the execution squads. Because now they push this fake purity test that none of them themselves pass, which is the elite inner circle that they have. So I understand his perspective by seeing a lot of these people not trusting due process, not trusting the ideology that is here already, which is the concept of just having a court system. They instead have this impromptu social court system that's not even supported by black or brown people. It's a majority of white people, and they bring their tokenized people near them in order to prevent any accusations of racism. Meanwhile, they hate white people and associate with white people deeply. It's a concept that a lot of people have to be careful about. When black people themselves and Latinos themselves are constantly saying the same thing, the biggest fear about socialism in the United States of America is that it'll hide its national roots within white people, and then they'll hide it within their spouse, which is a person of color, that they're going to enact their racism through to say that they're not racist. This is why he even mentioned it. It departs into a Nazi party because a lot of these people in these socialist circles want to become a one race society, but they don't want to help the immigrant because they think the immigrant's burdening them. They don't want to help the black people because they think they're the ones that are always the ones that are begging for more stuff that are free. If you actually look at the doctrine and the ideology, they tokenize the Islamic faith overseas, but they ignore the black and the brown here in America. This is why the ideology of the purity testing is another example of just Nazism, because they want to whitewash you. Their indoctrination of understanding Bolshevikism is not false. They have extermination squads here in America. They're the ones that outcast you and attack you because you're the one calling out their white supremacy racism within these socialist spheres, and these circles of which are just mainly majority white, and any black or brown person you talk to is just another slave to the white person, that they are keeping a gradient shader of just the inner circles white with their token dots, and then the outer limits start to turn darker and darker. This is why a lot of these socialist organizations and a lot of these people on the left are majority white. It's why you have people like Biden elected, and he used to be Jim Crow era. And if there was a huge upsurgence of socialist class and the only ones they wanted to listen to was a white man, he would be the one they would listen to, or any replacement of him. This is why the leftist movement has two different sides, and that is the Bolshevik, which is the one that includes the black and brown, and the Bolshevik that results in the elitism, which is always going to be the majority white people that has people of color on the outer limits in order to keep the herd consolidated as the true America, or the true indoctrination of what it means to have a socialist society. This is one of the things I've warned people about, but of course they outcasted me instantly as a person of color who doesn't know what they're talking about. They say I'm unaccredited. Well, they are the ones accredited in white supremacy because they were taught within the colleges and the systems of which to put white people first. And if you look at the wealth disparity and the wealth gaps, they're putting black and brown at the bottom of their list. They are not putting them at the same level as the other workers, because the other workers are considered the more literate, or the people that have more education and free time, while the rest of us are busy working or going homeless to the ideology that they espouse, telling us that we have EBT and welfare and we should be good enough. And what notion do you think that he's mentioning here? Because a lot of the time, the purity testers are the people that want the purest people around them, are oftentimes the ones that turn to nationalist socialism because they're proud of their oath, they're proud of their nation, and they still serve the same nation they complain about. It's why a lot of this socialist ideology falls flat, because it is oftentimes only espoused by white-skinned people, and their spouse of which is just black or brown women, in order to tell you that they are the smart ones, and then anyone who is black or brown men who is being taught by white people will conform to the ideology of white socialism, which is just another word for national socialism, which is why they are concerned about the collapse of the leftist circles, because a Weimar Republic means the nationalist socialist rises, and the people that are nationalist socialists push the same social safety nets, but they still push solidified borders. They still push the doctrine of that you need more money, because a lot of them will fundraise, and you see this online. You can see that statistics, they fundraise a tons of cash, but none of it actually pushes the legislation, which means they're pocketing it. That means they're just putting it in their pockets and getting rich off of it. They're robbing the people of their prosperity and running with it like National Socialists, slaves to the white man, slaves to the white supremacy, and they're just going to help create a National Socialist society.
Of power. I'll read it to you directly. According to Lenin, he said, "We set ourselves the ultimate aim of abolishing the state, all organized and systemic violence, all use of violence against people in general, the 200,000 notwithstanding. As we start this thing, you need to break a few eggs. We do not expect the advent of a system of society in which the principle of subordination of the minority to the majority will not be observed. In striving for socialism, however, we are convinced that it will develop into communism, and therefore that the need for violence against people in general, for the subordination of one man to another and of one section of the population to another, will vanish altogether, since people will become accustomed to observing the elementary conditions of social life without violence and without subordination. But for right now, you all subordinate, yes?
Yes, and violence.
Yes, and a little bit of violence. Also, we cannot have God, because if we have God, we have strong families, we have strong churches. These are communities. We cannot have communities because they're nothing. They might fight back. And if you want to know where Bolshevism still exists today, some Jewish people, sure. To be clear, I've said this in the past, and this is the case for tribalism. I'm going to disagree with Jews on a lot, certainly theologically. I'm going to disagree with the left on everything. I'm going to disagree with many black voters in this country a lot. Probably more than we agree. I'm going to disagree with the left on everything. I'm going to disagree with women in the Western world today a lot. I'm going to disagree with the left on everything. I'm going to disagree with Muslims quite a bit. I'm going to disagree with the left on everything. And today, Bolshevism exists exclusively, as it always has, on the left, and they are not hiding it. Identify the drivers of that which ails this country.
It's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing.
Our main project is to unite the working class in this country against a fascist agenda.
Stay calm. All of the workers are all right. Oh, the rich will survive, though.
We will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism.
But then there are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right, or whether it is the end goal of seizing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support at this very moment.
The reason this matters, if you are starting off where you have said the through line is Jew, yeah, I will say this, secular humanist Jews have presented quite a few problems for the United States. I will not disagree with that. And I agree, as a matter of foreign policy, by the way, that we need to look out for the interests of our country first, and AIPAC can go screw themselves with a wire brush. But if you are starting off looking at the threat, saying, okay, where do the remnants of Bolshevism still exist? And you've predetermined Jew, you've just ignored atheists, Muslims, secular Jews like Bernie.
The intriguing thing about the Israel issue is it's something I've been thinking about. Every time you try to critique Israel, they use the same excuses they do for tokenism in the United States of America, which is you're attacking me because I'm Jewish. You're attacking me because I'm Jewish. Now, you can attack that to each minority group in America, but every time you attack Israel for that concept and that notion, you're technically justifying the means of which you are allowed to take their land from them, which is why a lot of the people say that when you attack Israel, you attack the people of color abroad. Because when you attack them, you're attacking the same concept that you deserve to be there, that you deserve the right to exist, which is a lot of the discussion topics a lot of minorities give on accident that triggers a lot of white people to think that they're all pro-Israel when really they're just using the same victimhood as a shield in order to protect themselves. Very interesting dynamic, because the more the left starts to attack Israel, they're arming the Republicans with more and more excuses to finally come out and tell you you cannot use your victimhood to defend yourself anymore, which is why it's enacting an extreme powerful strength within the Republican right-wing party and the white race as a whole, because they're getting more confidence in knowing that if they can take Israel down, they can take down black people's arguments, they can take down the Latinos arguments, they can take down Asians arguments and the Indians and anyone else in the Middle East, because every single one of them essentially uses the same platform that we have a right to defend ourselves. You just hate me because I'm this. You just hate me because I'm that. And that ideology is a fascinating one, because as soon as you try to defend it, you are again on the side of Israel without realizing it, because they're still fighting with the same ideological weapons as you are. It is interesting to me, very interesting, because this dynamic, I got very curious about why a lot of the racist white men would align with a lot of the rare situations of being anti-war, anti-genocide, but oftentimes they would not be anti-genocide or anti-war against other nations. They are just against it because they are finally at a place where a person is white, can be judged for being white, but they're different on the inside, which now gives them the differential of attack and agenda that any black or brown person that tries to speak up and say, you're killing me because I'm black or brown, if they can now say the same excuses they use with Israel, saying, no, you're just a fascist. No, you're just an evil person. No, you're just a person who disagrees with me. Now I don't like you, which is now turning the tribalism that they use as a support group on the left against them and now causing infighting. And they're clowning on that and counting on it later on, because right now they're all on the same side, but as soon as they jump ship, a lot of these black and brown people are going to start to eat each other alive in this discussion that is now left in the open for people to discuss and fight with. When they start having this purity or this, like he said, this execution squads of trying to clear out anyone who disagrees with them. Fascinating ideology, because I see it here now. He doesn't like Israel, but he doesn't like a lot of people, like he said down that list.
Buddhists, but there is one through line that is remarkably consistent. They're all leftists. And you don't see it anywhere on the right. At least you didn't for a very long time. You need more proof? Modern day Lenin acolytes. A lot of celebrities. They love to venerate another Marxist, another Bolshevik of another flavor, Che Guevara. Stamp it on a t-shirt and sell it for 29 bucks. Now, if you see all that and go, through line Jew, you may need to check your biases. Let me give you another example. Lenin, we're talking about the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin. To be clear, there's still a statue of him in the United States today. Matter of fact, it's a statue that they refused to erect in Russia.
They've actually brought it down.
They brought it from Russia to the United States for American Bolsheviks to be able to enjoy. Where? Seattle.
The first leader of the Soviet Union seems like an unlikely figure to be immortalized in the U.S., but this statue of Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin has sat at the Seattle intersection since 1996. The Czechoslovak Socialist Republic commissioned and displayed Emil Venkov's work, but then a year later, the Soviet Empire collapsed. Like many other depictions of Lenin, it was soon taken down. Years later, Washington native Louis E. Carpenter, now living in Slovakia, discovered it laying in a scrapyard. He argued the statue's artistic merit to the Slovak government. A deal was made for $41,000, in which he mortgaged his house to fund its purchase and transport. In August 1993, it arrived in Carpenter's hometown of Issaquah. Sadly, though, only months later, he was killed in a car accident, leaving the statue's status in limbo. A couple years later, local artist Peter Bevis facilitated a deal to display Lenin here in this intersection until the family finds a buyer. That was almost 30 years ago. So here it sits, an unlikely Cold War-era landmark in a city that played a huge role for America during World War II.
Now, I know someone's probably going to find a banknote or someone who co-signed a loan. See, Jew. Okay, sure, fine. But Jews make up about 2% of the greater Seattle area. So they wouldn't be able to be the reason that that statue that has 4.5 stars on Yelp. You know what may contribute to it? If you're looking for modern day Bolshevism, King County, where Seattle sits, is one of the bluest counties in the country. So if you're trying to identify the drivers of modern day Marxism and Bolshevism, yes, you will find quite a few Jewish Americans, because you'll find a lot of them in intelligentsia and a lot of them in endeavors that involve the mind as opposed to the hands, not a very robust physical people. But with that statue,
they can do it. They just don't want to.
You're far less likely to run into this. Far less likely to run into that than you are to see this. Yeah. And here's the thing, too. And I know we're going to have to leave you. And this is one of the, no one wants to wade into these conversations right now, because I know someone will say, you're paid by the Jews to say this. Of course people will say that. You know what? You sound like a liberal. You sound like a Bolshevik. I've been around here a long time. You know what people used to say? Oh, you don't support the Kyoto Protocol, first the Montreal Accord, then the Paris Climate Agreement. You must be paid by big oil. And that is 2 degrees of retarded, lazy arguing. First off, it's not something that can be proven or disproven. So that's lazy. It's not a good argument. Second, you could be paid by big oil or have received a check from and still be right in saying a 0.3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature over the next century will not have catastrophic results to the point that we believe the WEF should be in charge of what we drive. It's 2 layers of lazy arguing. And I've said I will open this up to any commentator who's willing. We can have a third-party auditor look at the books. I can tell you, not only have I never received a dime from any foreign entity, any foreign country, we also don't receive money from nonprofits who undoubtedly have a lot of influences that may be both domestic and foreign. It's the only place. Like I said, I'm going to disagree with Jews on a lot, the left on everything. Blacks on a lot, the left on everything. Women on a lot, even feminists.
This guy's complaining about Nazis, but he's like, I'm gonna disagree with blacks, hard ass, women, which he got controversy for, and let's see what else he said. Muslims, he said Jews, he said, this is the white supremacist Nazi.
On a lot, the left on everything, and the threat still exists. There are still people pushing it right now, because it's not going to be done at the tip of a bayonet. But what were the Bolsheviks seeking to destroy? It wasn't just the Tsars, and it wasn't just the ruling class. They knew that to destroy a society, in order to have a culture, in order to have a society where you could say there was no subordination because everybody was subordinate, you had to destroy, and I don't mean institutions like academia or the entertainment industry, you had to destroy godly institutions like the family, like community, like moral absolutes that were agreed upon as a society. You have to do away with all of that, deconstruct it, so you can replace it with a new deity. And that deity, that new God, is always the state. So be aware of it and understand who it is that you're fighting. You let me know if you think that's fair.
To be fair, when you replace a god with a government, it's just natural Darwinism or just the acceptance of science. For example, if I die from a heart attack, it's probably the government killing me, or if I die by a car hitting me, it's government killing me. Heart attack because I didn't have health care to check my health. Car because they should have had better driving instructors, a better license and registration. When you come to the ideology of understanding why that man shot up the school is because you gave the person access to a gun because the government allowed it to happen, you start to understand that in a world without a god, you're going to have to replace God's virtue. And God's virtue is oftentimes a system that gives you a job, gives you education, gives you healthcare, gives you housing, and it does it in affordable ways that which it can be an actual adequate gradient of access to your basic goods. This is why your government is always replaced by God in theology or theocracies because you always want something better to therapy your incompetencies or your lesser value, which is why it sells you the concept of being poor and be happy about being poor and be grateful you're poor, and not in this ideology where you can never escape the poverty. And their perception, they think in a communist society or Bolshevik one, that it's going to collapse into a government is God, and therefore the most loyal will start slaughtering the disloyal, even if you're not a religious person, which is his perception of the cancel culture, or the culture of which people constantly come out to get you and lynch mob you and have their pitchforks and torches out. So their concept is the realization that there is no government, it's just God now. And the government being God means they dictate morality, they dictate law and order, they dictate you not being there because they want the purest and the most supreme people. They don't want anyone's opinion. Democracy dies. The concept of democracy is replaced with a dictatorship, which the dictatorship is filled with some of the most wisest people, which is no longer actually determined by success in the government or the success of the environment, but rather in the success of the social sphere of who says the nicest things and gets away with manipulation, because this society has never built itself on an exploitative measure of exploiting the inhumane to give to the humane, which is to take from the rich and give to the poor. That concept is lost on a lot of people because they still use a lot of the capitalistic understandings of reality, and they just plan on using that same concept to give themselves a better footing. So they'll use these LLMs or these economy modules built on capitalism, and they'll just type into it to put a communist or a Leninist perspective, and then therefore the entire economy is fixed all of a sudden, which it will not be. You'll need a new plan, you'll need a modernized plan, and you'll need something up to date in order to enact this new economy that they want to have, because to suddenly seize the means of production does not have a realistic measure to it, because they will always resort to just killing people they disagree with, which is a very big issue that they have, because you can see the early signs of that through the cancel culture, through the lynch mobs, or through the hate circles that will try and go into your past, look into everyone in your past to destroy your now, and then you do that with them, but suddenly none of them are being held accountable because their accountability is completely robbed of them. They're one of the elite now, and now they're in the same position as the bourgeoisie or the rich capitalist class. They're just understanding that this concept that they have is just another institutionalized elitist group of bourgeoisie, which is why these systems, oftentimes when you destroy the empire, are oftentimes going to turn to this more imperialistic normal, which is just the Darwinistic principles applied all over again, that which of all of them are going to start to adhere to the exact same indoctrination they had before. Which is why it's just a power vacuum that leads to the same capitalistic endeavors. And this is why communism is a flawed perspective, because it's supposed to update with its measure, which is why it's proven through the dynamic of the socialists having their ideology stolen through Allende, through stealing the economy's balancing of the marketplace in order to be used in a capitalistic society here in America. This is why the often seen as exploitative measures of capitalism oftentimes steal or take from the communist ideology. This is why the perfection of this perspective is one that, if you reroute some of it to a more socialist understanding, you will have something worth admiring or respecting. This, of course, is the biggest danger, because when you have these people who are desperate for power, like we have now on the left, giving this power to people who never had power before is like watching a Palestinian run for food aid in Israel, or which is now Palestine, but soon, by the time you see all these communists take power, all of the places they supported will be decimated. So they don't have an actual plan of action, they're just desperate for power. And when they're desperate for power, they're not going to be qualified for the power, because they don't have any power to the people, they have power to themselves and their elite. So I understand his concern, but oftentimes in these circles, if you truly believe in the Darwinistic principles of which you live by, but the capitalists, then you understand that no matter what happens and no matter what communist gets elected, that communism will collapse under the ideology of the capitalists getting the greatest minds together, getting the greatest thinkers together, and while all of them take power, all of them will gather up in a big group and then utilize their power structures to take them out again. So again, once you understand what it means to be a politician on the left, then you know already those execution squads exist, those extermination squads exist, and they push you into poverty and laugh at you and ridicule you, and they'll slander and defame you in order to get power, look for blackmail on you, and destroy your name and picture. This is why the purity testing is just another dog whistle to capitalist bourgeoisie in the communist circles trying to take power again. That's the power vacuum that's already being seen within these spheres. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I only agree with the fact that the Bolsheviks depart into Nazism and then back into Bolshevikism because, again, this ideology falls apart through the notion of just white supremacy, taking anything with the name socialist on it and then hijacking it with the elitist thinkers because the elitist thinkers think they're better than everyone else and the record is what matters and being clean. Meanwhile, all of these leaders that happened before had to slaughter people by the thousands in order to enact their will of which they read with respect and dignity as they try to enact their same policies in this modern era. They're gonna fall to those same exact things that happened before.